Hello and welcome to another episode of B Sharp and C with your host, the world-renowned, world-famous, and legendary host, me, Artie Astor. This is the only podcast out there that talks about the underrated, the indie, the up-and-coming, and the underappreciated in the music world. Let me ask you a question, fellow listener. Do you like rock and roll? And it's not it seems like a basic question, but ask yourself, do you actually like classic rock? Do you like guitar solos, short guitar solos, long guitar solos like Pink Floyd? Do you enjoy watching two artists do a back and forth? You know, they're trading fours, so to speak. They're doing like a call and response. One guy does a little bit of a solo and then he kind of kicks it off to the next artist and he does a solo, just completely improvising. Do you like freestyle rap that's in the world of hip-hop, where people just make stuff up? Sometimes it's not even words, but it's rhythmic, it's musical, it fits the song. Do you like that? Well, then you should pay attention to this episode of B Sharp and C, because today's subject, I believe, has sent shockwaves through the music world that have essentially evolved and turned into many other things, but he was at the beginning of a lot of what we enjoy in music today, and most people don't really appreciate what Louis Armstrong has accomplished in his life. Yes, we need to be sharp and see the gigantic impact Louis Armstrong has had on the music world. He is our feature this week. Now, by considering his life, and we won't get too much into it, I really want to get into his musicianship, but by considering what he has done, okay, if we are an indie artist ourselves, we are actually left encouraged by considering the life and the musicianship of Louis Armstrong. We're encouraged to continue to move forward with our goals. We don't know when or how our own art will have an impact, but you know what? Neither did Louis Armstrong, okay? But the impact was huge. So huge that the blast waves are still resonating decades after his death. Now, he's not indie, he's not up and coming, and he's probably not underrated, but you know what? We're discussing him because I think he is underappreciated, and I dare say in many circles today, he's not even known. I mean, he's forgotten, but a lot of young musicians today never knew him to forget him. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Pops, Satchmo, Louis Daniel Armstrong. Who was this man? Was he born July 4th, 1900? No, although he told people that throughout his life. There's no real understanding as to why he lied about his age. After the research I've done, I just think he lied about his age so he could appear old enough to play in clubs as he was growing up. That's essentially the only thing I can think of. But he was actually born August 4th, 1901. He was essentially born at the same time jazz was born. Now, that's a very interesting tidbit of information, okay? Jazz and Louis Armstrong shared a room at the maternity ward together. In the storm clouds of jazz, Louis Armstrong was there hiding behind the thunder. And what we're left with today is a man who has pioneered and who has done so many things, but it just goes unnoticed. And it really does. His name is big, and he's had a few songs. He's even had a song hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But why is he underappreciated? Well, I don't want to do a documentary about this man. I don't want to make this podcast a biographical one. And what we need to understand is the basics, okay? But I really do want to talk briefly about his past, but get into the musicality of Louis Armstrong. But we need to understand even a little bit of what this man went through. Now, yes, he was born with jazz sitting next to him in the maternity ward, but that is about as happy as his childhood actually gets. Because his dad left him right after his birth. He was raised by his grandmother because his mother had to resort to prostitution to put food on the table. Just absorb that, okay? And it was also not uncommon for Louis Armstrong as a young child to walk the streets of New Orleans, and not the rich part of New Orleans, a part called the battlefield. He had to walk the streets of New Orleans barefoot, scavenging through dumpsters for food, while his mother was prostituting herself to also do her part to put food on the table. I don't want to get into the details of whether she should or should not have done that. Okay, I'm just talking about Louis Armstrong as a child. By the time Louis Armstrong was 7, he actually recognized a lot of inequality in the world, and I think this is amazing. He recognized it not just because he was a black boy growing up in New Orleans in the early 1900s, no, because a Jewish family, the Karnofskys, kind of took him in emotionally and raised him emotionally and tried to instill in him a love for music. And he noticed people mistreated Jews. He also noticed that people mistreated black people. But he looked at the Jews and thought to himself, you guys are kind of like me and my family. People just mistreat you for no apparent reason. He was 7, folks, when he noticed this, okay? 7. He realized by his time with the Karnofskys that singing could be cathartic. He noticed that music was something to be appreciated and that it was an escape, and he saw that with his Jewish family. Now, at 11 years old, he quit school. You know, most 11-year-olds, right? They quit school to put food on the table to help their family. Am I missing something? Oh, no, I'm thinking 21-year-olds graduate college. No, at 11, he quit school, okay? He quit school, tried to form a band with fellow youngsters, and went through the streets of New Orleans playing music, trying to make pennies to help the family. And like any 11-year-old, he got in trouble. You know, he was left by himself to figure out what life is about. By 12 years old, he got in trouble with the law. He ended up going into a juvenile facility. Listen to the name of this juvenile facility, okay? The New Orleans Juvenile Facility for Colored Waifs. Yes, a waif. A helpless, orphaned child. He went to a facility for colored waifs. The audacity of that name just existing is shocking. But this is the type of audacity that was rampant in many parts of the United States in the early 1900s. But look at what this child did during this time. So now he's the son of a prostitute. His dad left him. He goes to jail. He's in some juvenile facility. He joins a band. No doubt remembering how good music was when he was thinking of his time with the Karnofskys. He joins a band and excels. He becomes the leader of the band inside this juvenile facility. Okay? Music was becoming Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was becoming music. This, in my opinion, is the first pivotal moment of Louis Armstrong's musical life. 12 years old, 13 years old, leading a band and being appreciated. Now, he leaves this juvenile facility probably thinking, let me go live with my dad. You know, let me go live with my dad. Maybe that's a more stable lifestyle and I can focus on my music. I mean, most 12-year-olds, right, have to make this decision. So he goes and lives with his dad, but his dad's new wife has a kid. So now the dad has to look at Louis and say, sorry, son, you're out of here. He rejected him. So now Louis goes back to his mother and his grandmother in the shiny, beautiful world of the battlefield, where he was hoping to leave all of that behind him. Now he goes back. Years go by. He starts playing in clubs. This is where I think he began to lie about his age. Because now he's trying to get into the clubs to play, but you have to be a certain age. Interestingly, back then, and some of us probably know this, the mob controlled a lot of these clubs, or the mob owned a lot of these clubs. And people were going to the clubs and spending money because of the musicians. So there was pressure from the mob for musicians to continue to perform and to perform often in these clubs. Now, I don't know what Louis went through during this time. Like I said, I don't want to make this a biography, and I have done some research on him. There are indications that he has had, and he has actually written an autobiography, and there are other books written about Louis Armstrong. If you really want to go over every detail of his life, trust me, there's information out there. All right? But as a teenager, he began playing in these clubs. But I think the second pivotal moment of Louis Armstrong's musical career was when he was a late teenager. He began to play in the Mississippi riverboats. That's right. To me, this actually sounds like the first time he had a respite from this crazy life of his. The first time that he was actually able to stop and breathe and really enjoy the music he was playing. I really do believe that, and I think it's proven by what he accomplished in this 3 to 4 year stint. He was playing on Mississippi riverboats for jazz, for people just to go dancing. And in this 3 to 4 year period, he learned how to read music. He began to feature singing in his music, and he became leader of the band. So again, the second pivotal moment of Louis Armstrong's life, he had this period where he could just focus on what he was passionate about. And I believe that's confirmed because in 1922, he moves to Chicago, where the jazz scene is just booming. And his career just keeps getting better. And a lot of these cats from New Orleans, where jazz was getting started, a lot of these cats moved to Chicago in the early 1920s to do just what Louis Armstrong did, to get work that paid better. There was a big jazz scene, and for someone who was as talented as Louis Armstrong, he was accepted. Now, I can talk about this man for hours, but I'm not going to do that. Right? He has quite the history, but now I think that what I really want to do is focus on him as a musician. What did he actually accomplish? After all, that's the main focus of this podcast. Be sharp and see what Louis Armstrong has accomplished and what he has attributed to the music world. So why should we be sharp and see what this man has done for the world of music? Well, let's start with something interesting. Classical music, going back centuries, has always featured instruments as lead. Chopin would write a piece, and then it would be like, okay, this next 2-minute segment is just for the piano. So essentially, it was a piano solo. Or Bach would write something, and it was just for the organ. Or Beethoven would write something, and it was just for the flute or just for the violin. So there were instruments being featured as solos centuries before jazz. But you see, remember, jazz was just being born. Jazz was trying to find an identity. I guess it was going through its awkward teenage years, you could say. Louis Armstrong took jazz under his wing, and he said, you know what? Let me help you grow. And he was one of the first, and some people would say he is the first, to feature a lead instrument in jazz. Before this, it was a brass band. It was a guy with a trombone, a tuba, a trumpet, maybe a bass drum, whatever it was. Jazz was kind of like this music where people just came together and they would trade off one another and move around in that way. But there wasn't really someone featuring long solos on any instrument until Louis Armstrong started doing that with the trumpet. He would feature the trumpet as a solo instrument in jazz. Today, we take that for granted. Today, we actually hear jazz and we expect to hear a trumpet doing its thing, right? But Louis Armstrong, decades ago, was like the pioneer. Some say he was the actual first to say, let me just solo with this instrument and play long trumpet solos. And that idea has, I guess you could say, resonated into the music world since. It has gone into blues, where you have either organ or guitar solos. It's gone into rock and roll, heavy metal, where you have instruments soloing. And all those styles of music essentially came from jazz and blues. But Louis Armstrong was one of the first who said, I'm going to feature an instrument as a solo instrument. Something else that Louis Armstrong did, he would often go into recording sessions and do live sessions. If he went into the studio with notes, he would either not read them correctly, or he would lose the notes, or he would go in without notes. Whatever the case is, he began to kind of freestyle or improvise over the music. And this type of play in jazz exploded. Just knowing the chord changes and just soloing or improvising over the chords. This was something else that Louis Armstrong brought to the fore, and it just spread like wildfire. Everyone started doing it. But Louis Armstrong was viewed as someone who pioneered improvising in jazz. Just stop and think about that, because that is what we consider to be the embodiment or the personification of jazz today, is just people improvising. Louis Armstrong made it popular, and he made it cool. And it's interesting, don't we see that today? In fact, if you're a blues player and you don't just improvise over chord changes, or you don't kind of go back and forth with people, you're almost considered limited. No, I mean, that's not my opinion. That's the opinion of other people. But this style of play is very popular today, and it is exciting to watch. It is exciting to watch. There's a YouTube video out there. I don't know exactly how to find it. You'd have to probably just do some specific searches for it, but it's with a keyboard player, Arlen Shirebaum, and the guitar player, Joe Bonamassa, and they're doing a call and response. Joe on the guitar playing a few lines, and then kind of just kicking it off to Arlen, who would play something on the Hammond organ and then kick it back to Joe. And it's just raw talent. It's just people expressing themselves with their music. It's taking notes, taking airwaves and manipulating them and just expressing yourself musically with it. Right? This is something that is just so appreciated today. However, Louis Armstrong was one of the first to say, let me just express myself. And that idea of just playing something off the top of your head really was pioneered by him. Once this man with a weird, deep, guttural voice started singing, it also attracted more listeners. He turned his weakness into a strength and started singing. And this man's, just stop and really analyze this man's. Listen, go to YouTube and do like an interview with Louis Armstrong, and then ask yourself, does this sound like the voice of a jazz singer? The answer will be a resounding no. I swear, he has half an octave for a range, but he uses his voice perfectly, and it fits the music. He's got this deep, guttural voice, very throaty, with limited range, but people love it. He wooed the women with it, and the men liked it too. They would sit down, listen to Louis Armstrong sing, drink a glass of bourbon, while they had to laboriously get up to pour themselves another. So this was Louis Armstrong. But he also, with his limited style of singing, he also began to use scat singing. What is scat singing? Singing a song with lyrics, but at some point in the song, you just begin to kind of utter words that aren't even real, just sounds. Essentially syllables, but syllables that are musical, that fit the music, that fit the song, that are melodious, right? These are the things that he did. What's interesting about scat singing is that some people say Louis Armstrong invented it, okay? You know what? Let them say that. Now, he didn't invent it, just like Eddie Van Halen did not invent tapping. But Louis Armstrong took scat singing and rocked it, made it cool. Let people say he invented it. For all intents and purposes, he did. People that were scat singing before him kind of just did it in passing and moved on, and that was it. Louis Armstrong said, no, this is cool, man. I'm going to keep doing this. Same thing with Eddie Van Halen. Way before Eddie Van Halen was playing, way before he was popular, people were doing tapping on the guitar. Eddie Van Halen looked at it and said, "This is cool," and he rocked it. Let people say he invented it. Essentially, he did. You know, he brought it to the fore. But that is what Louis Armstrong did with scat singing, right? So he pioneered scat singing. He pioneered, the trumpet as a solo instrument for jazz. He also would use a really interesting vibrato in his voice where he just would sing a note and at the end of the phrase would just use this throaty type of vibrato with his teeth clenched almost. But he was always smiling when he sang. Despite his horrible history, he was always smiling when he sang. You can just tell that music was his escape. He also had a very nice vibrato on the trumpet that trumpet players today even try to emulate. But now, why do you, aspiring artist, Mr. or Mrs. aspiring artist, need to be sharp and see what this man has accomplished? Well, if you haven't figured out by now, let me help you. He started with less than nothing in his favor. All odds were against this man. Not only was he a black man growing up in a period where black people were just, mistreated, they were not given the same opportunities, but he also was very poor. And he had if you were to go back to 1909 and look at an 8-year-old Louis Armstrong, you would say, this boy has no future, right? But he beat the odds, but he did it because he just loved what he was doing. He had what some might say would be a limitation with his voice, but he turned that into something in his favor. He couldn't afford to go to music school or get professional training, but he just soldiered on. And I hate to sound cliche, but that's exactly what he did. He didn't give up in doing what he loved. Another thing I find really amazing about this man, in my opinion, is that his most popular song, in my opinion now, his most popular song is What a Wonderful World. For the podcast, I asked the listeners, I said, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Louis Armstrong? And a man who follows us named Zdert commented, "What a wonderful world," right? And it's true. It's the first thing that comes to mind when we hear of Louis Armstrong. Interestingly, that only made it at number 32 on the charts. Hello, Dolly was the only number 1 hit by Louis Armstrong. But you see, there's a very interesting story behind What a Wonderful World. I'll give you an example. It is known and documented that the president of ABC Records at the time, Larry Newton, absolutely hated the song What a Wonderful World. He didn't want it to be released. Now, there were rumors and stories that he tried to stop the recording from taking place. While Louis Armstrong was in the studio trying to record the song, there's a legend, I guess you could say, an urban legend, that he tried to break into the studio to stop them from recording it, and he was locked out. I don't know if that happened or not, although I'd like to think it did. It sounds like a pretty cool story. But it is documented that he refused to promote the song. Larry Newton did not like the song. But the song did get released, and in the UK, it killed it in the charts. But one man at ABC did not want to promote the song in the United States, so it essentially flopped. Now, what can you aspiring artists take away from this? That yes, a song could be absolutely awesome. It could be the best song ever written, which really isn't a thing, but it could be. If it doesn't get immediate popularity, or if it's not streamed immediately 200 times a day, it does not mean that the song sucks. The way the system is set up right now, obviously the music world is changing. Indie artists are able to put out a lot more of their music than ever before, but still, without the record industry, without record labels actually going out there and promoting your music, because they will spend money and they will use their connections and they will promote their music. Without that, even some of the best music can actually go unnoticed. So if you post a song on Spotify or YouTube and it doesn't get a lot of listens, it does not mean that the song is bad. It just means the world isn't ready for it. Or maybe the right people haven't noticed it. You could put a song on Spotify, it could get 1,000 listens. That could be 1,000 people who don't actually appreciate your genre or your style of music. They're not going to tell their friends about it. We don't know. Here's something interesting. What a Wonderful World got its most success in 1988 when the movie Good Morning Vietnam came out. 17 years after Louis Armstrong died, that is when this song actually became popular in the United States. And it was not because of anyone in the record industry promoting them. It was because, I don't know if it was the director's decision or whoever, but because in that movie, which was popular, this song stuck out in contrast against what was happening in the Vietnam War. And What a Wonderful World struck a chord with people 17 years after Louis Armstrong died. That is when the song reached number 32 on the charts. So I get encouraged by this because I publish music that I think maybe someday could be used in a television show or movie or listened to on the radio. And I hear other music out there that is just absolutely mind-blowing. It's just beautiful, excellent art. It goes nowhere. Sometimes I think people pay for advertisement, and some of these songs get like 15,000 views in a matter of weeks, and then the views trickle. After that, no one listens. Well, what about those 15,000 streams? Didn't someone listen to that song who had connections and they could have said, hey, listen to this song? We don't know. But this song, What a Wonderful World, reached number 1 in the UK when it was released, and it flopped in the United States. Didn't anyone in the UK call anyone in the United States and say, listen to this song, listen to this song? I don't know. We don't know. All we know is 17 years after Louis Armstrong died, that song exploded on the US charts. Just absorb that. And this is even after, years after it exploded in the UK. Because one man said, I don't want to promote this song. It didn't have popularity. So keep writing. If you're an artist, keep going. We don't have to stop because people don't like our music or people don't listen to our music. We simply don't know when or how it will strike a chord with people. Something else I find comforting when I was researching this man, in the 1930s, so he was in his 30s, in the 1930s he had to stop playing trumpet for a year because he had an ulceration on his lips. He was playing so much that he had an ulceration, he had to stop. And this could be career ending if it gets out of control. This easily could have deflated his resolve. This man had an absolute crap childhood. He had a detestable, deplorable conditions around him as he was growing up. In the 30s, he gets this ulceration and he has to stop doing the one thing that brought him pleasure. He easily could have said, this is not for me. I can't keep going forward. What I love about the Louis Armstrong story is that all of his big-time success with the Billboard charts, which started in 1958, but still in the early to mid-60s and in the late 80s, right, with What a Wonderful World, that is when Louis Armstrong hit the charts. Actually, if you really want to analyze it, whenever we think about Louis Armstrong singing a hit, the man is in his 50s or 60s. So he had to stop playing for a year in his 30s, and he waited, he started playing again, but a lot of his real commercial success came in the 60s. So another thing that we can take away from this, and I just love using him as an example, is that we might be in our 30s, 40s, or 50s playing around with music and thinking, I got to give up. You know, no one's going to buy my song. No one's going to collaborate with me. Well, if Louis Armstrong thought that, we wouldn't have had What a Wonderful World. We wouldn't have had Hello, Dolly. He wouldn't have made, I don't think he would have made the impact that he made. But the fact that he kept making music as late as he possibly could and kept trying to improve as much as he could, even in his later years, is very encouraging. You know, this whole thing that, like, if you haven't achieved it by 25, you're never gonna, or if you can't learn a new instrument in your 30s, or you can't, you know, if you haven't done it by 25 or 30, then just give up. That thinking, you know, I feel like, and I could be wrong, and maybe someone can comment on the Facebook page and correct me if I'm wrong, but that way of thinking, I believe, is modern. It's new. I don't remember reading anything in any research I've ever done about, like, history. I don't really remember reading anything in the 1800s or the early 1900s or even before, where someone said, "Oh my goodness, I turned 30. I just can't learn anything anymore." No. I really feel like that's something that like millennials came up with so they can get all the jobs. I mean, heck, they need the jobs. They have to pay $200,000 for their college tuition. No, but speaking seriously, I don't let a number, your age, make you think that you have to stop or slow down. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's just not worth it. And it's kind of funny too. I think about the success that he had, and with all the odds against him, it's, I don't know. It's just nice. It's nice. People do appreciate art. They do appreciate good music. They do appreciate hard work. It's just not always going to be obvious. I guess it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for kudos, if you're looking for people to appreciate you, if you're looking to be idolized, yeah, you might want to change your goals and just focus on the art. Let the art speak for itself. It actually might speak louder than our own ego. And that's my philosophy, and I think it works. But that's it. I can go on forever talking about Louis Armstrong, and I want to thank everyone for listening. This was a long episode of B Sharp and C, but I do believe this merited a lot of attention and a lot of care because of the character of Louis Armstrong, and I believe the legacy that he has left behind. I feel like I need to just keep talking for another hour just to do it justice. But again, this is not a biographical podcast. So I just want to thank everyone again for listening and for being sharp and seeing with me the wonderful legacy that Louis Armstrong left behind. And until next week, I am your host, Artie Astor. Have a great week, folks.